Alan West was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in the same neighborhood where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once preached. He's the third of 4 generations of military servicemen in his family. During his 22-year career in the United States Army, Lieutenant Colonel West served in several combat zones: in Operation Desert Storm, in Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he was a battalion commander in the Army's 4th Infantry Division, can't talk today, and later in Afghanistan. He received many honors, including a Bronze Star, 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 3 Army Commendation Medals, and a Valorous Unit Award. In 1993, he was named the U.S. Army ROTC Instructor of the Year. After his retirement from the Army in 2004, Alan taught high school for a year before returning to Afghanistan as
I figure if you're going to get shot at, you might as well be overseas.
Well, that's exactly what he did. He returned there as a civilian military advisor to the Afghan Army, an assignment he finished in November of 2007. In November of 2010, Alan was honored to continue his oath of service to his country when he was elected to the United States Congress representing Florida's 22nd District. As a member of the 112th Congress, he sat on the Small Business and Armed Services Committee and was instrumental in the passage of the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. He is a Fox News contributor, a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, and regularly writes for numerous media outlets, and he has now written a book. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alan West.
Oh, thank you. Wow. Well, look, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy lives, busy schedules to come out here and spend a little time with me. This was an incredible endeavor. I started writing this last March. Dana Perino, that many of you know, former White House press secretary, and now she's on the 5, contacted me and said, you have an interesting story and you need to write a book. And I said, well, okay, but I just didn't understand which direction to go. So I prayed about it and asked the Lord, what would he have me do? And really it was about telling my story growing up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, the impact that my parents had on me, the experiences that I had, 22 years in the military, some of the incredible leaders, how they shaped me, and my political philosophy. Because one thing about me, I believe so passionately about this country. The ability for someone to be brought up from the inner city, same neighborhood as Dr. King, to be standing here before you today, that's an incredible journey, and that's what America is all about. But what I really believe is that people are starting to forget the essence of who we are as a constitutional republic, and that's why I said it's the guardian of the republic. Because if you go out and you ask most people, is America a democracy or a republic, you know what they're going to say, it's a democracy, and they have it totally wrong. So what I tried to do in this book was to establish what the Founding Fathers created for us. Last week as part of this book tour, I had the opportunity to go up to Philadelphia. And I'd never been to Philadelphia before. I do remember when growing up in Atlanta, the Atlanta Flames playing against the Philadelphia, those Flyers, and this guy named Bobby Clark, who had no teeth, meanest guy I ever seen skating on ice. But I wanted 2 things. I wanted an original Philly cheesesteak, and I wanted to see Independence Hall. Because Independence Hall was the birthplace of this great nation, this birthplace of this great republic. And little did I know I would be staying at the Omni Hotel right there at Independence Park. So that on the 8th floor from my room, I was looking down at Independence Hall, and I got a chance to go and tour it. But the interesting thing about Independence Hall, on that hot summer day, September 1787, when Benjamin Franklin came out, he was met by a Philadelphia socialite, a woman by the name of Mrs. Powell. And Mrs. Powell said, well, doctor, what is it that we have? A republic or a monarchy? Franklin said, we have a republic if you can keep it. That was the challenge just a little over 200 some odd years ago. And I really believe that right now, if we don't go back and understand what the basis of a republic is, number 1, rule of law, number 2, the preeminence of the individual. And that's what Thomas Jefferson talked about in the Declaration of Independence, when he talked about the unalienable rights that come from your Creator, of those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But unfortunately, as we forget what a republic is, as we forget what the rule of law is, people are talking about a guarantee of happiness, and that's not what it's supposed to be. We have these rights that enable us to go out and be able to share and be a part of the American dream. And I think that if we don't go back and reclaim and understand what was left to us some 237 years ago, then we will not meet up to the challenge that Benjamin Franklin gave us to keep this republic. I'll be very honest. When 5 days before the 2008 election, then Senator Obama stood up and said, we're 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. Nobody said a word. Nobody asked fundamentally transforming it to what? But even more importantly, no one said fundamentally transforming it from what? And I think that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at the Man on the Street, little segments that they go out and do. And someone said, asked of a person, they said, do you think Bill Clinton deserves more credit for winning the Korean War? And the person said, yeah, we should give President Clinton more because the Korean War was a tough war to have won. We laugh, but this is the level of the lack of understanding of who we are as an American people. And if you don't understand from whence you came, you don't know from whence you're going. And it becomes very easy. You know, I only served in Congress for 2 years up here. And I will tell you this, if the American people don't become more in tune to what they have in this country, in this nation, and its fundamental principles and values, then anyone can come along with a poll-tested, market-driven, bumper sticker slogan, and you'll follow it. And that's what's happening in this country. We're not critical thinkers anymore. We become headline readers. And in becoming headline readers, you become easily manipulated. So what I tried to do was simply talk about my love of country, my experiences with this country, why I love it so much, the fundamental principles of it. Talk about what it means to be a black conservative. A lot of people believe that being a black conservative is some new little trendy, cute thing. But if you go back and you read Frederick Douglass, if you really read Booker T. Washington and his 3 fundamental principles, education, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance, that's why I call him in the book the father of black conservatism. This is not something new. But in all ways, as the military taught me, if you're going to bring up issues, you got to bring up solutions. So we try to close the book talking about the way ahead for this great nation and what we must start to understand and giving those solutions as far as restoring our economy, what we need to do as far as economic security, but most importantly, what it means to have leadership. Because I think right now we have, politicians as opposed to statesmen. We don't have true servant leadership, and I talk about what servant leadership is. People can criticize me for the decision that I made in Iraq back in 2003 as a battalion commander, but this is the most important thing. When you're a commander, you're not there about your career. You're not there about using your soldiers as a stepping stone to get to the next level. You've been entrusted with something that's incredible. The lives of men, in my case, or women in combat. But not just the lives of those men and women in combat. It's the mothers and fathers that are dependent upon you. In my case, it was the wives that were dependent upon me, the children, the brothers, the sisters, the cousins, the aunts and uncles, all of those people who showed up at the pre-deployment briefing at the 4th Infantry Division Memorial Chapel. And one father stood up and asked me a simple question, are you going to do everything possible to bring my son back home? What do you say to a dad that asks you that question? You say, no, I'm going to look out for me first. I responded, yes. And I told him I'd lay down my life to make sure that every single person that got on that airplane gets back on the airplane to come back home to each and every one of you. That's what servant leadership is about. And we must go back and get citizen servants, citizen legislators to come here to Washington, D.C., not looking out for their own self-interest or special interests, but for your interests. If we can do that, the greatest days of this country will be ahead. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy the book. You'll learn a lot about me because I believe in transparency. So you will find out about the little devious thing I did as a freshman in high school. You will find about some of the things that really hurt my heart. You will learn more about my wife Angela and our 2 daughters, Aubrey and Austin, and why I want to make sure that I give them a better America than what my father and mother, Herman West Sr. and Elizabeth Thomas West, left for me. So with that being said, what are your questions, if you have any? Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service.
It's my honor. Too easy.
We were drafted, so we had no choice.
There's a lot of people ask me, should we go back to a draft? And I don't think so. I think right now, if we had people, the most important title for the president is commander-in-chief. And we have to have leaders that understand the military and be able to talk about victory. We don't talk about victory. If you think about what happened on a Monday up here, not too far away at the Pentagon, where the Secretary of Defense announced what he was going to do, decimating the military strength of the United States of America, what happened by Friday of that week? Vladimir Putin crossed the border and went in and began to seize the Crimean Peninsula, and we see what is happening now. That's the most important thing. And we have to start looking and understanding that being a commander-in-chief cannot be on-the-job training, and that's a bipartisan issue. We've got to give people that the most important responsibility for the federal government is to truly be a guardian of this republic. You know, not making America into a welfare nanny state or a dependency society. It's supposed to be to protect the American people and allow each and every one of you, with your own investment, ingenuity, and innovation, to have a better way of life, to have a pursuit of happiness. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
In regards to, you know, one of the current hot topics is the military service in exchange for amnesty programs.
Oh, that's a very hot topic with me.
Now,
Yeah.
you know, what is your opinion on that? Do you think it's smart for the country, or?
You know, I'm a student of history, and I talk about it all the time. And if you go back and you look at one of the reasons that led to the fall of Rome, when Roman citizens no longer served in the Roman army, they started to, guess what, send it out to all of the outliers, all the people that were part of the greater Roman Empire. That led to its collapse because people were no longer fighting for Rome. They were just there as really mercenaries. So we don't want to see that happen. I think one of the greatest things, and my father served in World War II, my older brother served in Vietnam as a Marine. Both were wounded in combat. I did 22 years. My nephew now is a major in the United States Army. It's all because we want to serve. My father taught me that the greatest thing that you could do is put on the uniform of this nation and give back to something that is greater than yourself. If we start to dangle a carrot out there saying that you can get this if you just show up and play Army, Marine, or Air Force or what have you, my fear is that we don't have young men and women that really are there because they want to be there. We lose that legacy of the Minutemen of Lexington and Concord who answered the call, and fired the shot heard round the world. So I am not for that. On my website, alanbwest.com, I wrote a piece about that. I think that if that's something you want to do, you should not try to attach it to what is the Defense Authorization Bill. You need to let it stand alone and let the American people see it, let it be debated on the House floor, the Senate floor, whatever. But don't start dangling American citizenship. I don't like the lottery thing for American citizenship. Being an American should not be about lottery. Being an American should be about what's in your heart. This is the greatest nation the world has ever known. We have an incredible birthright for those of us born here and for those that come here. There is no place greater than the land of the all-night 7-Eleven. Yes, sir.
Colonel, I was wondering, was there a time in your life that when you were growing up, was there any certain situation that occurred to you or came upon you that made you a conservative leading person? Or were you raised in a very conservative family?
Well, I talk about that in the book because the essence of, my parents were registered Democrats. But how my parents raised me, it was about faith, it was about family, it was about education, it was about individual responsibility. If you really wanted to get a big bad whipping from mommy and daddy and everybody else, you go and blame somebody else for what you had just done. You don't do that. But it was also about fiscal responsibility. My parents never had a credit card. My parents, if you didn't have the money to get it, guess what you did? You set it aside at layaway. And when you had the money, you paid off on it, and then you got whatever it was. So that was the way I was brought up. And then of course, believing in national security, all conservative principles and values. And I talk about that in the book, how yesterday was Sunday. And I made the statement in the book that the most conservative people in the United States of America on a Sunday are in black churches. All you have to do is be there and listen to what's being preached. Now something happens Monday through Saturday. We got to continue to engage people on their principles and values, not about party, but principles and values. And that's what we talk about in the book. So that was always there with how my parents brought me up. But there was an incredible moment, and I talk about in the book, but I'll just mention it here, was when I went through Checkpoint Charlie. How many people here know what Checkpoint Charlie is? See, that's another one of those things we should talk to people about. Because once upon a time, you had to go through this thing, Checkpoint Charlie, to go from West Berlin to East Berlin. And if you were in the military in uniform, you could go over there. And when, as a young first lieutenant, 25 years of age, no, 24, I was over there walking the streets with Soviet generals, seeing East Germans, of course, being followed around. But I saw the difference between liberty and freedom and tyranny and socialism on the other side. And so you knew what you were standing on freedom's ramparts for. And that was an incredible experience for me as a young man. like I said, to come out of the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, and be over in East Berlin, I'll never forget the look of despair and despondency on the faces of the people that were over there. But unfortunately, if you go to some of the inner cities in Atlanta, Georgia, or inner cities like Atlanta, Georgia, Chicago, Detroit, Washington, D.C., you're starting to see that same type of despair and despondency on people's faces. One more?
Question, Colonel.
Yes, sir.
My wife here is 33 years old. I'm 67.
You're in trouble, man. You are so done. Just go right down to the jewelry store.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
Never served. They sent me back. But I was born after World War II. And to see people like you is a beautiful thing. Because if we can bridge the gap between the very young and people my age, you'll be the next president of the United States.
Wow, that's up to God. Okay, but it is important that we talk about the American ideal. We talk about what makes America exceptional, a cut above. We talk about the reason why so many people want to come to this country. Legally, through the front door, you know, I would ask, but they want to be a part of this great experiment. This country is 237 years old. How many veterans we got out here? Okay, you know, veterans, you know, I've been to 13 different countries, 3 different combat zones. I've been in countries that's been around for thousands of years. What has enabled us to produce, look at this, in this short period of time that we've been in existence? It's not because we trusted an overarching onerous federal government or government structure. It's because we trusted individuals to be able to go out to work and create. But if we get to the point where we no longer believe in the individual, if we get to the point where we start to believe in the collective and we start to pit collectives against each other, man against women, black against white, straight against gay, I mean, whatever you can come up with, then the age-old maxim of the military divide and conquer becomes the modus operandi here in Washington, D.C., and I think that's what you see happening. We have to have people that can talk to Americans and make that emotional connection to Americans and talk about a better and brighter future, not just for yourselves, but for your children and grandchildren. Because my concern is that we may be, if we're not careful, we could be the first generation that leaves less to subsequent generations than was left for us. Why is that important to me? Because my parents, dad was born in 1920, mom in 1931. It weren't easy being black down south in those years. But my folks never badmouthed the country. They said, you live in the greatest country, there's opportunity out there. And that's what they taught me. They taught me about the equality of opportunity in this country. They didn't teach me about equality of outcomes. And I'm very concerned about that, especially now where every kid gets a trophy. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make a statement in that my kids are no longer in public school. I moved them to private for different reasons. But my son at his school, they offered a course in communism. And the first thing the teacher didn't lecture them. He handed out the manifesto. That was a textbook. Said, read this. And then he, after a week, came to me, set it on the table, and said, it doesn't work. It's impossible. And then the discussion went from there within the classroom. And to me, that was an interesting and a very good way to go about it, in that they got to discuss what was going on and the rights and the wrongs. And I just wonder how we're going to go if we're seeing the schools pushing a doctrine instead of educating the students. Yeah,
that's the important thing, is that, you know, the centers of education should be a place where you share thoughts and ideals, exactly, not where a certain ideology or dogma is pressed upon you. When I look at, and I taught school for that 1 year down in Deerfield Beach in Florida, we're not teaching kids. We're teaching kids how to take a test.
Right.
We're teaching rote memorization. We're not teaching the critical thinking skills. We're not imparting to our children, you know, the ability to be productive. Not every kid has to go on to college.
Right.
Yeah? There's nothing wrong with being a plumber. As a matter of fact, you guys remember, you know, being in high school, we had wood shop, we had, you know, auto mechanic and all this stuff. You look at what those guys that work in the pit crew for NASCAR. Those guys making 6-figure incomes. Okay, they're not boneheads. And a lot of them, they didn't go to college. They went to NASCAR university. But see, there are so many other things that we can do and get our kids to be productive. We don't need to tell them you've got to go and spend a whole bunch of money, get way in debt, come out with a degree in underwater basket weaving, not be able to find a job, okay, and then move back at home with mommy and daddy. I got 2 girls. 21 and 17. Okay, and my oldest is a junior in college, and she's a pre-med biology major. The youngest is a junior in high school, and we want them to be able to think critically for themselves. Okay, now in the home, we're benevolent dictators. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But we want to present them with thought-producing situations, you know, where they're able to go out and not be just. I'll give you a great example. When Wilma hit New Orleans, y'all remember the pictures of the people that just sat there on top of the house waiting for someone to get them? We don't want that. We don't want lemmings in this country. We want individual thinkers that can sit up and say, hurricane's coming, this is what I got to do. It's a category 4, category 5, all right? Not sit around and wait. Y'all saw all those buses sitting in the parking lots, okay? That shows you the ineptitude, the inefficiency, the ineffectiveness of, you know, centralized governments to really be able to take care of people. People have to understand. And the other thing is communities start taking care of people as well. And I think we're eroding that. But yes, the fundamental thing of education, a good quality education that opens up opportunities. You know, when I look at things like this Common Core and others, I get very concerned about what we're doing. Federal government can't dictate education standards. The federal government can make sure that every child has equal access to a quality education. But education is local. That's why we have local school boards. And kids learn differently. Kids up here in Washington, D.C. in this area learn different from kids down south, learn different from kids in Kansas, learn different from kids out west. Anyone else?
Actually, I do.
Yes, sir.
So you make a great point that politics is local. However, being a small businessman now, after coming off the Hill, and seeing how local governments work, and stick it to the small business person, I sometimes wonder, especially when you're talking across jurisdictions and many jurisdictions, and how many people I've got to pay and how many people got in my pocket.
Sure.
How do we control that? Because sometimes there's nobody watching. So if you go over to Alexandria or you see Mayor Gray in D.C., you know, if you want to go there and do business, I basically have to go with the city. Do something for the city, I basically have to pay them for the privilege to tell them, you know, hey, this is how you put a roof on your building.
Oh, sure. I mean, when you think about all the levels that a small business owner has to deal with now, being at the local government, being at the state, and then at the federal level, it is almost as if we're discouraging people from wanting to go out and create their own business. And small business ownership is 75 to 80% of the United States of America. That's the engine that drives us. And when we look at the onerous regulations that are being pushed down, when we look at the type of taxation that we have, it is everything that's counterproductive to the small business owner to be able to grow. And that's what we need to be fostering. You know, when I look at all the closed storefronts down in South Florida, Americans used to be there. Americans used to be working there. So what are the type of things, the type of policies that we need to institute? You know, there are certain things, you know, 2 + 2 = 4, except in Common Core, you can come up with 2 + 2 = 5, and as long as you can prove you got the 5, you're okay. But there are certain things as far as taxation policy. There are certain things as far as monetary policy that are time-honored and proven and that have worked. But when you start to get governments, being at the local level, state or federal level, that believe that now all of a sudden it's about accumulating the wealth of the American people in order for them to be able to provide the largesse out, now you have political bribery. And as a matter of fact, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about this in the book Democracy in America. It was previously mentioned by, I think Alexander Tyler, a Scottish gentleman. He said a democracy cannot last as a permanent form of government. He said democracy can only last until the point where the people realize that they can vote their own largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, voters will always vote for the person that is promising them the most benefits, with the ensuing result being the collapse of the democracy over loose fiscal policy ensued and followed by a dictatorship. And that's where we are. I mean, if I promise you this, I promise you that, and I promise you this, and I promise you that, okay, it's very simple. I mean, when the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, came out and said the Affordable Care Act is going to disincentivize work to the point 2.5 million Americans are going to be out of work. And what was the response that you saw on those Sunday morning talk shows from a bunch of folks up in Washington, D.C.? We're going to free Americans from job lock. They've been trapped by work. We're going to allow them to stay at home, pursue their own, joys and endeavors. Yeah, play the bass guitar. And we're going to provide them a subsidy check from the government. Now, this is the question that someone should ask. Who's working to provide the subsidy check from the government? Because the government doesn't generate revenue. The government, what's tomorrow?
Right.
I just found out the amount of the check that I got to write. So what does the government do? The government subsumes the resources necessary for you to be able to hire, put more Americans back to work. There are left to right limits that the government is supposed to have. And that's, I talk about in the book. The Founding Fathers established the Constitution to be a limiting document on the federal government. But when you have politicians that all of a sudden understand the more I get people wedded to me, the more power I have up here. The most lucrative counties in the United States of America are where?
Within 30 miles.
Right up here. A lot of construction cranes up here, folks. And a lot of that going on outside the Beltway. So you're absolutely right. When you look at all those levels of taxation and regulation, you get up and you wonder why. And when producers stop producing, as Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money.
What's stopping people from seeing, especially in this area, that the people who are telling us how to live don't live like that?
Because the people up here in this area are living good. Okay, it's very, look at what has happened in the recent election in Virginia. Look at the preponderance of people that live up here in Northern Virginia that are tied to the federal government. And they're the ones that are skewing elections here in the state of Virginia because business is good for them. If Allen West comes along and says, you know what, we're going to get back to the fundamentals of the Constitution. We're going to, lessen the size and the scope of the federal government. Off with his head. No way. Okay, and we're almost at that tipping point where it's going to be very difficult to get the federal government back under control. I have seen it. I have seen what it has done to my community, my own neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia. We're celebrating and talking about, Lyndon Johnson, war on poverty and everything. When Lyndon Johnson came out, and I write about it in the book, when Lyndon Johnson came out and said, we're going to give women who have a child out of wedlock, we're going to give them a check. As long as they don't have the man in the home, we're going to continue to give them a check. So what did you do in the black community, especially when now out of wedlock births is 72% in the community? You replace responsible male role models with the government. And you told males in the black community, you can be a responsible. And now look what has happened in jails. But those young ladies continue to get that largesse from the public treasury. And it becomes very hard to break because now you got second and third generation. Scary. Tipping point. Yes, sir.
So how do the boxers of the world from Animal Farm push back on this?
I think that, as I said, my mother taught me one simple thing. She said self-esteem comes from doing esteemable things. And if people can once again remember what it means to work and get the fruits of your labor and do esteemable things, then I think the better days of the country are ahead. But we got to have that very personal conversation with folks. Look, the left hates me. I had never been in politics in my life. First term member of Congress. George Soros threw $5 million into the race against me. I was the #1 target for Nancy Pelosi's PAC. There was a group out of San Francisco that ran a shadow campaign in South Florida. They set up a campaign headquarters and everything. And why? What is the problem with a 53-year-old black American, been married for 24 years, with a wife with an MBA and a PhD, 2 very good, successful, smart daughters, 22-year career in the military, 3rd or 4th generations out of the military. You see what I'm saying? That's not the picture that they want out there. But then that's not the picture that even people in my own party wanted out there. Because remember, they were the ones that redistricted me out. So we've got to have that personal conversation. And my challenge to each and every one of you, as you read this book, don't throw it up on the shelf and let it get dusted. Give it to someone else. Allow them to read it and challenge them, because that's what I try to do in the book. What type of America do you want for the future? We're at that point where Benjamin Franklin challenged us. It's whether or not we own up to the challenge. Brad, last question, and one more, 2 more. Okay.
Colonel, I think George Soros did you a favor because you're much better off in a national theater than you are in a local theater. And I think that they're
Yeah.
going to find out that you're going to appear at some point in history down the road as a very famous individual. And I
Or
totally
infamous, as
understand
my
that.
wife would say. Yeah. Well,
I
look.
think things are going to look up for you because you're
Yeah.
doing everything right, and it's not going to get worse. It's going to get better.
Well, I tell you, this past weekend I was out in Fresno, California speaking. The weekend before that I was in the state of Washington. In between that, you know, New York City, D.C., Philadelphia, you know. So you're right. I have been very blessed by God to have this incredible platform. And that's a huge responsibility. And I take that very seriously, very much so. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Would you consider seriously running for higher office as a president?
You know, when people ask me if I would consider running for higher office, this is what I always tell people. It comes from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all thy heart and lean not upon your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. I pray that every single day, that I will be obedient to God and to my country and continue to be a guardian of the republic. Thanks, folks.